109 or 109 is an idea as much as it is a number. I call it 10-9. To understand 10-9, it takes a creative mind willing to explore numerology, psychology, history, philosophy, and statistics. iSee109 explores the mysterious interpretations of this number from a myriad of perspectives.
My work is to ensure that before you ever learn about the Mayflower in 1620, you're going to learn about that ship in 1619 called the White Lion. You're going to learn about our stories of resistance, of the contributions of Black Americans, and we will not be erased from the narrative of the country that our ancestors built. And then we see why they're trying to ban our history, right? Because once you learn your history, you don't accept your place. Once you learn your history, you challenge the way that power is wielded against the vulnerable. So that's why they want to outlaw our history, because history will radicalize us. History will open our eyes. There's a reason we're the only people in the history of the United States for whom it was ever illegal to learn to read and write. Because we know, right, that education leads to liberation. And you can't keep people down who understand their history.
Well, I think the basic reason or symptom or proof for the racism of the Christian church is the simple fact that white people have pretended for so long that Jesus was white, and that they've had the necessity to interpret Jesus as being white, when essentially white Christianity is racially is historically false and theologically absurd, and practically, in terms of its effect on black people, it's a debasing institution that enslaves black people. I think we have to understand, though, that we're not making moral judgments here. Any institution that exists in any society exists to serve the interests of the people who set it up. And Christianity began as a black man's religion. It's an African religion. We have to remember that Israel went into Egypt with 70 people, and after approximately 750 years came out with over 2 million people, and hordes of other slaves who came out and became also part of the emerging new nation of Israel. So Israel, the biblical Israel, was a black nation, an African nation that came out of Africa and kept constant ties with Africa. And so we have to remember then that Jesus was a black Messiah, not a white Messiah, and he comes out of the whole historical background of Africa, of African traditions, of African history, of African culture, the concept of communalism, the concept of a chosen people, the concept of kingdom of God on earth. All these things were out of African tradition, not out of the white man's tradition. And Jesus was essentially a revolutionary Messiah who was trying to lead a black people in a revolt, in a struggle and conflict with a white Gentile oppressor. So the whole church has to be viewed from the point of view of the white oppressor. The white oppressor has one kind of Christianity, has one kind of church. The black church has to become independent and go back to the historic African roots of Christianity, because the slave church that the white man set up for black people tends to continue the enslavement of black people. So the black church has to become, again, a revolutionary instrument in the hands of black people, controlled by black people, fighting, as Jesus fought, for the liberation of black people against white Gentile oppression.
Ain't no guarantees, but you know that. Niggas die every day, can't control that. That's why I call my thing a marathon, because I'm not gonna lie and portray this ultimate poise like I've been had it figured out. Nah, I just didn't quit. That's the only distinguishing quality from me and went through this or is gonna go through this, is that I ain't quit.
Quizás en tu vida nunca has oído un cuento como este. En el futuro no vas a oír un cuento igual. Esta es una gran oportunidad para oír un cuento extraordinario. Presento el cuento sobre 109.
A day in the life of a legend named Larry. I've got coincidences to talk about. Don't be scary. And because I saw an omen, you might think I'm joking, but I don't really care. It's just something that I noticed. Now, this is how I do this when checking a grip. All these instances are spooky. Please don't trip. 10-9, Law 2 is how my car's license plate used to look. Pockets empty, no job in LA. It was time to book. I traveled overseas, arriving at a new country, hopped off the plane, got handed some house keys, settled down, and got started earning a salary. Come to find out, my birthday is a national holiday. 10-9 on my mind. I was fine, I thought, until I started waking at 10-9 on the dot multiple times, and then it hit me. These numbers keep coming to visit me. Even when I bought a train or plane ticket, my seat would be in 10, in row 10 or 9, respectively. It was even my group number, which I thought was assigned randomly. Cut to that day at Addis Ababa University, learning Ethiopian history. I went to the bathroom on the second floor. Yep, you guessed it. 10-9 was written on the door. Even my cousin Anwar told me to connect with Inca spirits in Peru. He said at Machu Picchu, ancestral spirits will greet you. I ascended Montaña Machu Picchu that morning around 8. Took a look around, enjoying the view. It was great. Checked my watch, it read 10-8. I knew the spirits were telling me to make my descent, so a minute later I did to stay within tradition. While in Havana, Cuba one night, I read about Ernesto Che Guevara de la Serna's life. Imagine the sight when I read that he was captured on the 8th of October and on 10-9 lost his life.
I think that's about right. So I want to recap my trip. Wow, I didn't take a picture. So this year has been a very spiritual year for me. Um, I have seen my birth date, 109, in various forms in many different places all throughout the year, and it has always encouraged me, and I've always used it as an as a sign, as an omen uh, of of good luck, positive reinforcement whenever I see that. So I'm coming to the end, the close of this year. It's December 29th, 2017. And the last time, maybe not the last time this year, but the last time I saw 109 was when I left the airport after returning from what is my last trip in 2017 uh, from Sri Lanka. When I exited the airport, uh, I
hailed a taxi, and the taxi that, picked me up had the license plates 109, first three numbers. I saw that and I just said to myself, wow, look, here it is again, you know. And every time I've seen 109, it's just, it's a huge coincidence, just a huge thing. It's a huge thing for me. And the frequency with which I see it, and uh, yeah, it's just something I trip off of, often.
In Saudi Arabia, hailed a cab, and when it came near, the license plate started with 109, and it had me feeling weird. If anything, I could say that this cab was rare, but I thought, nah, forget it, yo, Holmes, to Bel Air. I began to think these coincidences are signs. Why else would a man's death coincide on the same week as is celebrated Mohammed's rise? Peace be upon him. In other words, that same week, Muslims celebrated Muhammad's ascension to heaven. It's funny how every 7 days leading up, I was greeted by a new revelation. Peace be upon the Prophet. 28 days earlier, Ethiopians felt elated. That day, the 123rd anniversary of the Battle of Adwa was celebrated. 21 days earlier, and Ethiopian feelings turned to deflated. That day, Ethiopian Airlines Flight 302 was annihilated. 14 days earlier, I posted a picture of a goat to IG since it disrespected me by stepping on my new blue lace Nike sneaks. I felt like bugging out from do the right thing. 7 days earlier, in an IG photo I posted, I wore one sock on my right foot while laying in a tent eating Oreos while reading a book. Yes, these are a lot of mundane details, but well, one day upon reflection, I tell you all these details connected to reveal a vision that became clear. It was also that fateful day the world received news it didn't want to hear. On March 31st, for all of y'all in LA, but I was 11 hours ahead already into the next day. I awoke and checked IG to realize a friend who rarely posts photos had posted a photo to my surprise. I read the caption and began to cry. That was how I learned that he died. After learning his fate, I still had to drive to work, but I felt homesick, thousands of miles away, and I wanted to get back to LA really quick. The streets were empty except for me and this one truck. Do you know this mofo cut me off like, what the? It was the start of a difficult week, but something told me to be easy. A calmness washed over me when I noticed that that same truck's license plate read 1090. I knew then it was meant for me to see and be in that space at that time precisely. 7 days later, I kid you not, an omen appeared in the sky. There were chemtrails up there, don't ask me why. Overhead in Oman's former capital, Nizwa, few planes fly overhead, if ever, so the sight of chemtrails above was irregular. It wasn't the lines that had me at a word loss. Rather, 'twas the sight of the lines forming a cross. Let me attempt to surmise, stranger than fiction. His first name means God will rise. Coincidentally, him and Jesus dying at the same age, 33, seems eerie. Oman borders Yemen, which is home to an ancient biblical kingdom from which his last name traces back to Punt and Aksum. Oman Yemen, Saudi Arabia, specifically Ethiopia and Eritrea, Habesha, once ruled by Queen of Sheba. Moses, seeing the burning bush, led to him beginning the exodus of Israelites out of Egypt and into Canaan. 10:9 and that cross have me feeling ancient. Y'all think I'm crazy if I tell you to leave LA, board planes, and relocate to Shashemane, Kumasi, or Mekele. But that's okay because I'm confident in what I say. Islam, Judaism, and Christianity aren't so different. I mean, come on. These religions were birthed from Abraham. Are you aware that Jesus is mentioned more than Mohammed in the Quran? And peace be upon them. Professor John Henrik Clarke sparked my thoughts on religiosity. He suggested putting religion down to increase spirituality. And like Rastafarians believe that Haile Selassie I was Yahshua bin Yosef's reincarnation, I believe that that man was a deity trapped in human form. Of course, I'm probably just famished, searching for meaning because I'm lost. But I'll be damned if anybody tells me he wasn't a boss. He actually demonstrated what to do, helped his people, and mastered knowledge of self. It's evident in his philosophy about gaining wealth. My colleague, Rochelle, said she didn't want to hear me talk about 10:9 anymore. She said 10 and 9 are everywhere, and I believed her, especially when I went to Japan's Apple store. There, every device was set to the same score. However, when the first friend you make after the first international trip you take shares the same birthday, you wonder anyway. Plus, 1 week after posting that picture to IG, I saw that video of the firemen carrying him out on a gurney. Surprised to say the least when I noticed that he was wearing one sock on his left foot. I felt shook. 7 days before his body went limp, I was wearing one sock on my right foot, eating Oreos in my tent. So in the poem, I say 10:9, or this is what I say. Let's see. 10:9 on my mind, I was fine, I thought, until I started waking at 10:9 on the dot. So to keep the what is it? To keep the rhythm of the poem, whenever I talk about these numbers, I say 10:9. But in this verse, I'm talking about the time 10:09. But even though I'm talking of the time 10:09 or 9 minutes past 10, I don't call it, I'm not using the convention of calling it 10:09 because that would mess up the rhythm of the poem. So the time that I'm referring to is 10:09, but to keep the rhythm of the poem, I just say until I started waking at 10:09 on the dot. So that's what I was experiencing that. Like I was in South Korea. Um, I was in I was in Medellin, Colombia. I was in Los Angeles recently, And I had these moments whereby I went to sleep and then I suddenly woke up. Sometimes I suddenly woke up, or sometimes I just, woke up. And I found it peculiar and curious that I would wake up, check my watch, check my clock, and the time would be 1:09, a.m. or p.m., or 10:09 a.m. or p.m. So it's happened so many times. Kind of interesting. Or rather, it just piqued my interest and curiosity. I wondered what was happening. Why was this happening? Why did I happen to wake up at that particular hour? Um, so these numbers really just like called my attention. Said, "Hey, pay attention to these numbers." That's what this poem is about. You know, it started from these moments where I would see these numbers and I would say, "Hey, that's my birthday," and these numbers were familiar to me. But then it became, I'm waking up at this hour. Like, what is the reason for that? Why? Why is that happening? So if you want to know the answer or my explanation, then it has to do it has to do with what it means to be an angel number, or what the meaning of this angel number is, which is, they say that 109 is the calling, is the number for calling to your purpose. It's like, don't it's these numbers are saying, don't ignore your purpose or your calling. And this is basically the calling, like, hey, pay attention, pay attention. So that's one interpretation. But then there's also this idea that, well, I was online and I was searching for the meaning. I was trying to understand this. This was over a year ago, maybe 2 years, maybe 3 years now. But I was doing some research and I found a website that called itself 109 World. And I thought that was interesting. And so I emailed, um, it was a company. I emailed the company and I asked them, why did you name your company 109 World? Because I had this particular relationship with these numbers. I knew this to be a number that alluded to my birthday, um, and yeah, it had a special, particular meaning to me. So I wondered, hey, does it mean the same for you? And when I asked that question, then they were able to lead me in a new direction because they had a completely different interpretation. And they told me that there are the mala beads. Well, they introduced me to the mala beads. They told me the mala beads have 109 beads on them. They're used for prayer and so forth and so on. So that was an introduction to a new interpretation for me. And then from there, I I began to see, or rather to recognize, that it wasn't so much um, that this is a calling, like for me. Like, these numbers aren't really calling. These numbers aren't so much um, aren't so these numbers aren't so special, because the 109 world introduced me to the number of 108, which is a highly sacred number. So I'm right next to it. I'm right next to 108. I'm right next to that sacred number. Um, but my interpretation and my understanding has grown, because now I know the importance of 108. And I guess my calling with 109 is to share what I understand about 108 with the world. You know, I, that's the way I make sense of it. You know, it's an interesting story. But what it really is it's a journey of learning. It's the journey of, hey, did you know this? Did you know that? Look at the connections. Look at how these things are related. And it really boils, or really springs from, it comes from a place of curiosity with regard to a familiar place, a familiar number. So yeah, it's a place of love. This is starting from a place of love. So there I was in Machu Picchu. I climbed up the mountain, and I was enjoying the view. It was great. My watch said it was 10:08, and then I made the decision. I made it up. I said, you know what? I think these are the spirits talking to me through these numbers. So I said, you know what? I think they're telling me I should go down the mountain now. I made it to the top. Now it's time to go down. So at 10:08 a.m. atop Machu Picchu, the spirits told me, okay, you did it. Now go down the mountain. So what did I do? In the poem, I say, a minute later, I did, or I descended the mountain. I did to stay within tradition. And that tradition is me, you know, doing things or following or seeing 109 as a sign and then moving accordingly. The 109 was my sign. I found it. I saw it atop Machu Picchu. And Machu Picchu is in Peru, and Peru is a highly spiritual place, just filled with mystery. So having that moment there in Machu Picchu was like, mwah, you know. Then I was in Havana, Cuba. The story about Cuba is just crazy. Too many details to really get into it, but I saw 10:9 when I was reading the book about Ernesto Che Guevara de la Serna. That's his full name, Ernesto Che Guevara de la Serna. And I learned that he was killed on October 9th. So not only does this number represent, or can it be read as a time when I say 10:9, but it's also the date, October 9th, 10:9. And that was the date on which Che Guevara was killed. I learned that fact, that little tidbit, that little factoid. I learned that when I was in Havana, Cuba, the country where he led his revolution. So that was a cool connection and a coincidence that really was inspiring. Like, wow, 10:9 is a magical number. But then the other thing was, I wondered to myself, like, or I thought, hey, wouldn't I said to myself, you know what? He died in Bolivia. He was killed in Bolivia, and his body is in Bolivia. Now, this was in 2017 that I read about his life, and I learned that he, when he died, and it really resonated with me. And in that moment, I thought his body was still in Bolivia. I forgot that in 1997, his remains had been exhumed in Bolivia, and they had been repatriated, brought back to Cuba. So when I was making this connection with Che Guevara, learning the date on which he was killed, and how it relates, or how it is the same day on which I was born, 12 years difference, 12 years difference. Then when I made this connection, Che was in Cuba at the same time that I was in Cuba. So that's the little connection, like, oh my gosh. So it was like, for me, it was like, yeah, it was my destiny being in Cuba. It was like your travels are not in vain. You're not just going to these countries to travel to take selfies, to check it off the list, and these things. No, you're going there to learn about a history, and also you're traveling. I was traveling through time and space at different locations, and then the history that is in that place comes to life. It's the history isn't even history. It's the present. So literally, he was right there. His legacy, his spirit, Che Guevara's spirit was right there, and I was encountering it in a very cool, curious, bizarre way. Same thing happened with Frida Kahlo. I had a moment after coming back from my travels where my sister called me, and we were talking about Frida Kahlo on her birthday. And while I was on the phone with my sister talking about Frida Kahlo, I was standing in front of a table where there were four postcards I had purchased from Frida Kahlo's The Blue House in Mexico. So Frida Kahlo was staring at me while I'm on the phone talking to my sister about Frida Kahlo. And unbeknownst to both of us, while we were talking about Frida Kahlo, it was her birthday. Like, yeah, that's synchronicity for you. Yeah, there's more to this poem, but I'm going to leave it at that. I'll leave it at that.